I still remember the exact moment my world cracked open like a rotten egg. It wasn't some slow-burn suspicion, some creeping sense of dread that built up over time. No, it hit me all at once, like a freight train slamming into my chest at full speed, leaving behind nothing but twisted wreckage and the foul stench of betrayal. I was at a high-end restaurant, one of those places with dim lighting and overpriced steaks, celebrating a business deal with my colleagues. Laughter, clinking glasses, the low hum of conversation, everything blurred together into white noise. Until I heard her laugh. That laugh? The one I had fallen for 15 years ago. My grip on my glass tightened. I turned my head, slow, controlled, like a man expecting to see a ghost. And there she was, Emily. My ex-wife. The woman who had walked out of my life 13 years ago, leaving me with nothing but a short, cold note. I can't live like this. You'll never give me what I want. Goodbye. She sat at a booth across the room, all done up in a tight dress, her golden hair cascading over her shoulders, a dazzling smile plastered on her face. And right next to her was a young boy, around 12 or 13, his features sharp and strikingly familiar. His deep brown eyes mirrored her husband's, a man sitting proudly beside her, beaming with pride as they talked about their son. I clenched my jaw, while rising in my throat. She left me because she thought I was infertile. She threw away our marriage, discarded me like garbage, and for what? To run off with someone else and build a life? I was nothing more than a failed experiment to her. For a moment I considered walking away. Let her rot in whatever fairy tale lies she had built for herself. But then she turned. Our eyes met. And she froze. Her confident smirk faltered, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. A flicker of fear crossed her face, like she had just seen a ghost. Her husband, oblivious, kept talking, laughing, until she reached out and gripped his wrist. Michael, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But I didn't care about Michael. I didn't care about her husband or their life. I cared about why she looked like she had just seen the dead rise. Then I realized she wasn't staring at me. She was staring at the boy sitting beside me. My son. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smirk creeping onto my face. The realization hit her like a hammer to the skull, and she swallowed hard. Still single, right? She asked, her voice shaking slightly. My son's a cute genius like my husband. She forced out a laugh, but her hands were trembling. I placed my hand on my son's shoulder and squeezed it gently. Nice, I said, my voice steady, unwavering. Here's my son. The color drained from her face. She trembled, her nails digging into her husband's arm as she desperately tried to maintain her facade. But I saw it. The crack in her armor. The fear in her eyes. And I knew at that moment she was hiding something. Emily's face twisted into something between shock and horror, her breath coming out in short, panicked gasps. Her husband, Michael, oblivious to the storm brewing inside her, gave me a polite nod, extending his hand like this was some casual introduction. Nice to meet you, man, he said, his grip firm, his smile warm. I didn't return it. My eyes were locked on Emily, watching her unravel by the second. My son, Jason, looked between us, his 12-year-old brain trying to piece together the strange energy crackling in the air. He shifted in his seat. Dad, you know her? Emily flinched like the word dad was a gunshot to the chest. Her fingers curled into fists against the tablecloth, knuckles white. Michael chuckled, unaware of the landmine he was sitting on. Of course they know each other, son. Your mom and I. Emily shot him a look so sharp it could have cut glass. I leaned forward, dragging out the moment. I wanted her to feel this. To drown in it. Yeah, I know her, I said, watching her squirm. We were married once. Michael's smile didn't fade immediately. It lingered for a second too long before cracking, his brow furrowing. He looked at Emily for confirmation. She was still staring at Jason, her face drained of color. Her silence was enough. Michael shifted uncomfortably, confusion knitting his features. Wait, what? Jason sat up straighter. Wait, what? Emily swallowed hard. Her nails dug into the tablecloth. It's complicated. I laughed. Loud, humorless. Not that complicated. You left me because you thought I was infertile, right? I tilted my head. Seems like you were wrong. Michael turned to his wife, his eyes narrowing. Emily, what the hell is he talking about? She didn't answer. She couldn't. She just kept staring at Jason like he was some kind of ghost. Michael's gaze flickered between us, realization dawning too slow for my liking. His hand dropped from the table. Wait, his voice wavered. Emily. I could see it the moment it clicked in his head. I leaned back, satisfaction curling in my chest. Yeah, I said. Think about it. Michael's breath hitched. His head snapped back toward Emily, eyes wide, voice barely a whisper. Tell me it's not what I think it is. Emily sucked in a breath, finally tearing her eyes away from Jason. She looked at her husband, her expression a mask of desperation. "Ayo." But she didn't get to finish. Michael shoved back his chair so violently it nearly toppled over. He shot to his feet, hands shaking. "Jesus Christ, Emily. Is he mine or not?" Jason stiffened. My hand stayed on his shoulder. I could feel the tension running through him. Emily opened her mouth, but nothing came out. That was all the confirmation Michael needed. The restaurant buzzed around us, unaware of the bomb that had just gone off at our table. Michael's hands curled into fists at his sides, his jaw tightening as he sucked in a sharp breath. He took one last look at Jason, then at me. And then, without another word, he turned and stormed out. Emily jolted, panic flashing across her face. "Michael, wait," she tried to go after him, but I caught her wrist. She turned to me, fury and desperation burning in her eyes. "Let go of me." I held firm. "Not so fun being left behind, is it?" She yanked her arm free. "You think this is funny?" Her voice trembled. "You think I wanted this to happen?" I smirked. "You made this happen." Her lips parted like she was going to spit out another lie, another excuse, but then Jason spoke. "Mom?" Emily flinched. Her eyes darted to him. "Jason, He shook his head. "Who is he?" His voice was quiet. "Why does he know you?" Emily's face crumpled. She reached for him, but he leaned away. My chest tightened. I had come here expecting an awkward encounter, maybe a cold conversation, but this was something else. And somehow I knew it wasn't over yet. Emily's hand hovered in the air for a moment before she let it drop, her fingers twitching like she wanted to grab Jason and run. But there was nowhere to run. Not anymore. She looked at me, her expression a twisted mix of anger and fear. "You can't just show up and ruin my life." I almost laughed. The audacity. "Your life." I leaned in, my voice low. "You burned mine to the ground 13 years ago. I just handed you a match." Her breathing was ragged, her chest rising and falling like she was about to break apart right in front of me. But she wouldn't. She was too much of a coward for that. Jason shifted in his seat. "Somebody tell me what's going on," he said, his voice unsteady. "Is she my?" Emily turned to him so fast her hair whipped across her face. "Jason, honey, let's go home." Jason didn't move. He looked at me, then back at her. "Not until someone tells me the truth." I exhaled slowly, bracing myself. He deserved the truth. Every single piece of it. "You want to know?" I said, locking eyes with him. "She left me 13 years ago. She thought I couldn't have kids, so she ran off and started a new life with that guy." I nodded toward the restaurant door where Michael had disappeared. "And now?" Turns out she was wrong. Jason's face paled. His hands clenched into fists on the table. "You mean," his voice cracked. "She lied." Emily reached for him again. "Baby, listen to me." He pulled away. "No," his chair scraped against the floor as he pushed himself back. "No, I don't want to listen to you." Emily's eyes shimmered with panic. "Jason, please, let's just talk about this at home." His nostrils flared. "You mean your home? The one you built with him?" He scoffed. "You know what's funny? I don't even know if I have a real home anymore." Emily winced. "That's not fair." I cut in. "Neither is what you did." She shot me a glare, but she knew she was losing control fast. Jason turned to me, hesitation flickering across his face. "And you?" His voice was quiet, uncertain. "Why didn't I know about you?" I swallowed. "Because I didn't know about you." He blinked, confusion settling in. "You didn't." Emily jumped in, desperate now. "I didn't know either. I swear." I looked at her, my jaw tightening. "You didn't know?" My voice was dangerous, steady. "So you didn't just assume I was the problem? You didn't take off the second you thought I couldn't give you what you wanted." She opened her mouth, then shut it. Jason's stare turned sharp. "You left him because of that?" Emily faltered. "It was complicated, Jason." He let out a bitter laugh. "No, it's not. You left. You lied. And now you're lying again." She went to argue, but Jason was already grabbing his coat. "I need air," he muttered, pushing past her. Emily spun after him. "Jason, wait." I caught her arm again, firm but not forceful. "Let him go." She glared at me, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "You don't get to tell me what to do with my son." I held her gaze, unflinching. "Our son." The words hit her like a slap. She yanked her arm free and stormed out after Jason, but I didn't move. I sat back, running a hand down my face. The restaurant buzzed on like nothing had happened. Like my entire world hadn't just been flipped upside down. I exhaled. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I stepped outside a few minutes later, the cool night air sharp against my skin. Jason stood a few feet away, arms crossed, staring at the pavement like it held all the answers he needed. Emily hovered behind him, tense, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to speak but didn't know how. I walked over slowly, stopping a few feet away. You all right? Jason exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. I don't know. His voice was quiet but heavy. I feel like my whole life just flipped upside down. Emily took a step toward him. Baby, I know this is a lot, but let's just go home and talk. He turned on her so fast she flinched. Home. His voice was sharp now. You mean with Michael? The guy you've been lying to just like you lied to me. She recoiled like he had slapped her. Jason, it's not like that. He let out a cold laugh. Then explain it to me. Explain how you left him, he pointed at me, because you thought he couldn't have kids. Explain how you married Michael and made me think I was his son for 13 years. Her lip quivered. I didn't know. Bullshit. Her eyes widened at his tone. Jason shook his head, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles twitching. You knew. Maybe not for sure, but you knew there was a chance. He took a deep breath, rubbing his temples like he was trying to hold himself together. I don't even know who I am anymore. Emily reached for him again, but he stepped back. Jason, please, she begged. I love you. I have always loved you. His face twisted with something I couldn't quite place, hurt, betrayal, disbelief. I don't believe you. Emily inhaled sharply. You don't mean that. He laughed bitterly. I don't even know what's real anymore. He turned to me, hesitation flickering across his face. What about you? I held his gaze. What about me? Do you even want me? His voice cracked slightly. You didn't even know I existed before tonight. The weight of the moment settled over me. I wasn't going to give him some half-hearted response, some empty promise just to make him feel better. He deserved more than that. I took a step closer. I don't know you yet, Jason. My voice was steady, honest. But I want to. Something flickered in his eyes, something raw and vulnerable. Emily looked between us, her breath coming faster. You're not taking him from me. I turned to her slowly. I don't have to take him from you, Emily. You're doing that all on your own. Her face darkened. You think you're better than me? You think you can just swoop in after 13 years and play Father of the Year? I took another step toward her, lowering my voice so only she could hear. I don't have to be perfect, Emily. I just have to be better than you. Her nostrils flared. You son of a... Jason cut her off. Enough. We both turned to him. He looked exhausted, like the weight of everything was pressing down on him all at once. I need time, he said finally. I can't just go back home and pretend everything's normal. He turned to me. Can I stay with you for a while? Emily inhaled sharply. Jason, no. He didn't even look at her. I nodded. Yeah, you can. Emily's eyes burned with fury. You can't just. Jason faced her fully. I don't trust you right now. Her mouth opened, then shut. She looked at me like she wanted to kill me. You think this is over? I smirked. I know it isn't. She stormed off, heels clicking against the pavement, disappearing into the night. Jason let out a long breath. That went well? I chuckled, shaking my head. Yeah. Real smooth. He ran a hand through his hair, then looked up at me. So, what now? I clapped a hand on his shoulder. Yeah? We figure this out. And for the first time that night, he looked like he actually believed me. The drive home was quiet. Jason sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed, staring out the window like the city lights held some kind of answer. I didn't push him to talk. He had just had his whole life flipped upside down. I wasn't going to rush him to process it. I pulled into my driveway and shut off the engine. Jason didn't move right away. He exhaled slowly, then turned to me. What was she like? I met his gaze. Your mom. He nodded, hesitating. Before she left you. Was she different? I let out a low chuckle, rubbing my jaw. I thought she was. But looking back, maybe I just didn't want to see who she really was. Jason swallowed hard. She never really talks about you. I thought it was just because you guys had a bad breakup, but now he trailed off, shaking his head. She lied to everyone, Jason. Not just me. Not just Michael. You too. His hands tightened into fists. I don't know how I'm supposed to go back to that house and look at her like nothing happened. You don't have to. He looked at me, searching my face. Yeah, but I can't just walk away either, right? She's still my mom. I nodded. That's up to you. No one can tell you how to feel about this. He sighed and finally pushed open the door, stepping out. I followed, locking the car as we walked up to the house. Inside, I tossed my keys onto the counter. You hungry? Jason shrugged. Not really. I grabbed a couple of water bottles from the fridge, handing him one. He took it but didn't open it, just rolling it between his palms. After a long moment, he exhaled sharply and sat down at the table. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. I sat across from him. You don't have to figure it out all at once. His jaw tightened. Michael's gonna lose it when he realizes what she did. Probably. Jason scoffed. He's a good guy. I mean, he's strict, but he's always been there for me. I studied him carefully. Do you want to go back to him? He hesitated. I don't know. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. I feel like if I do, it's like I'm agreeing with everything she did. But if I don't, it's like I'm throwing away the life I've had. I leaned back in my chair. You don't have to choose right now. Jason stared down at the table. I just don't get it. How do you do that to someone? How do you lie to people you're supposed to love? I didn't have an answer. Not one that would make sense to him. Finally, he looked up. Do you hate her? I let out a slow breath. I did. For a long time. Jason studied my face. And now? I thought about it. About the years I spent trying to understand why she left. About the bitterness, the anger, the nights I lay awake wondering what I had done wrong. And then about tonight, watching her world crumble in real time. I don't think she's worth hating anymore. Jason nodded slowly as if trying to process that. I don't know how I feel yet. I gave him a small, understanding nod. You will. He didn't say anything after that. Just sat there, processing. And for the first time in 13 years, I wasn't alone. The next morning, Jason was quiet. He sat at the kitchen table, pushing scrambled eggs around his plate with his fork, barely eating. I wasn't going to pressure him to talk, but I could tell his mind was spinning. At some point, he pulled out his phone, staring at the screen like he was debating something. Then he exhaled sharply and set it down. She called, he muttered. I raised an eyebrow. Emily? He nodded. 5 times. Left 2 voicemails. I leaned back in my chair. What did she say? Jason scoffed. That she loves me, that she was just trying to protect me, that I need to come home so we can talk like a family. His fingers tightened around the phone. She doesn't get it. There's no family anymore. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. He let out a bitter laugh. She said you're manipulating me. That you're just mad at her and using me to get revenge. I exhaled through my nose. And what do you think? He shrugged. I think she's desperate. She's scared I'm gonna leave and she doesn't know how to fix it. She can't fix it, I said, my voice calm. Not the way she wants to. Jason nodded slowly, then leaned forward, elbows on the table. What happens now? That's up to you. He let out a slow breath. I don't know if I ever want to talk to her again. You don't have to decide that right now. Jason fell silent, staring at the table, deep in thought. Then finally he asked the question I knew was coming. What about Michael? I rubbed my jaw, considering. He deserves to know the truth. Jason frowned. You think she'll tell him? I let out a dry chuckle. Not a chance. Jason chewed on his lip. Then maybe I should. I met his gaze. You sure? He hesitated but then nodded. Yeah. He's been my dad for 13 years. He deserves to know who he's really married to. I studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right. Let's go. A few hours later, we were standing outside Michael's office building. It was one of those sleek corporate towers, all glass and steel. Jason shifted nervously beside me. You don't have to do this, I told him. He took a deep breath. Yeah, I do. Inside, the receptionist barely glanced at us before waving us toward the elevators. Apparently, Jason had been here plenty of times before. By the time we reached Michael's office, Jason's hands were clenched into fists at his sides. You ready? I asked. He nodded once, then knocked. A moment later, the door swung open and there stood Michael. His expression shifted from mild curiosity to surprise to something unreadable when he saw me standing behind Jason. Jason, he said slowly. What are you doing here? Jason's voice was steady. We need to talk. Michael's eyes flickered to me, then back to Jason. He stepped aside, letting us in. Inside, the office was pristine, every surface perfectly organized. Michael shut the door behind us, crossing his arms. What's going on? Jason swallowed hard. I know the truth. Michael frowned. About what? Jason's hands trembled slightly, but his voice was firm. About her. Michael's jaw tightened. What about her? Jason's eyes met his. I'm not your son. Silence. Michael didn't move, didn't breathe. Jason exhaled. She lied to both of us. Michael's hands slowly curled into fists. Say that again. Jason held his ground. She knew there was a chance I wasn't yours. She just never told you. Michael let out a sharp breath, running a hand through his hair. That's not possible. Emily wouldn't. She would, I cut in. And she did. Michael turned to me, his eyes burning. And you're just here to rub it in, huh? I shook my head. No. I'm here because Jason deserves the truth. Michael exhaled, his expression crumbling. He dropped into his chair, staring at his desk like he didn't know what to do with himself. Jason swallowed hard. I'm sorry. Michael let out a hollow laugh. You're sorry. He shook his head. Jesus Christ. I raised you. I thought you were mine. Jason's face twisted with guilt. I know. Michael let out a long, unsteady breath. Does she know you're here? Jason hesitated, then shook his head. Michael's eyes darkened. She's gonna lose her damn mind when she finds out. I smirked. Yeah, she is. Michael was silent for a long time, then finally looked at Jason. What do you want to do? Jason's voice was quiet but certain. I don't know. But I know I can't go back to that house. Michael nodded slowly, rubbing his temples. All right. His voice was tight. You can stay with him. For now. Jason let out a breath of relief. Thanks. Michael sighed, his face lined with exhaustion. I need time to figure this out. Jason nodded. Me too. We stood to leave, but just as we reached the door, Michael spoke again. When you see her, his voice was lower now, rougher. Tell her she'll be hearing from my lawyer. Jason froze for a second, then nodded. We stepped out of the office, and as the door clicked shut behind us, Jason let out a shaky breath. That went better than I expected. I chuckled. Yeah, that makes one of us. Jason shook his head, a small smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. You were right. This isn't over. I clapped a hand on his shoulder as we walked toward the elevator. Not even close. By the time we got back to my place, Jason looked drained. He sat on the couch, rubbing his temples while I grabbed a couple of waters from the fridge. I handed him one, and he took it with a quiet thanks, twisting the cap off but not drinking. I could tell he was still replaying everything in his head, Michael's reaction, the weight of the truth, the reality of his whole life shifting in a matter of hours. He exhaled sharply, finally looking up at me. You think she's gonna come here? I let out a dry laugh. Oh, no doubt. She's probably already on her way. Jason groaned, leaning back against the couch. Great. I sat across from him, resting my elbows on my knees. She's gonna try to manipulate you. She's good at it. Jason scoffed. Yeah, I'm starting to notice. He shook his head. I don't even know what I'd say to her if she showed up. Before I could respond, a sharp knock pounded against the front door. Jason tensed. I sighed, already knowing exactly who it was. I stood up and walked to the door, but before opening it, I turned back to him. You don't have to deal with this if you don't want to. Jason clenched his jaw. No. I need to. I nodded, then pulled the door open. Emily stood there, wild-eyed, her hair a mess, wearing the same dress from last night. She had clearly been crying, but I knew better than to mistake it for actual remorse. She shoved past me without being invited in, her heels clicking against the floor as she stormed into the living room. Her eyes locked onto Jason immediately. Baby, please, she started, her voice breaking in just the right places. We need to talk. Jason's expression was stone cold. Talk about what? How you lied to me for 13 years. Emily's face twisted in pain. I didn't lie to you, Jason stood up so fast she flinched. Don't even try that. His voice was raw with betrayal. You knew there was a chance I wasn't Michael's. You knew, and you still let him raise me like I was his. You let me believe it too. Tears welled in her eyes. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I scoffed. You knew what to do, Emily. You just did what was easiest for you. Her eyes darted to me, filled with venom. Stay out of this. I folded my arms. Not a chance. She turned back to Jason, her expression desperate. Honey, I made a mistake. I didn't know, I really didn't. Jason shook his head, laughing bitterly. I don't believe you. Emily stepped closer, reaching for him, but he took a step back. The rejection hit her hard. Jason, please. I love you. You're my son. Jason's face darkened. No. I was his son. The one you picked because it was convenient. And now that everything's blown up in your face, you're just scrambling to fix it. Emily let out a sharp breath. You don't understand, Jason cut her off. No. You don't understand. His voice was shaking, but his words were clear. You ruined everything. You didn't just lie, you stole my whole identity. And now you expect me to just what? Forgive you? Emily's face crumpled. I just want my son back. Jason's expression didn't waver. Then you shouldn't have thrown him away. Silence. Emily's breath hitched. I didn't. Jason turned away from her. I don't want to see you right now. Her eyes widened in panic. Jason, don't say that. Please. He didn't respond. She turned to me, her lips trembling, her eyes flashing with rage and desperation. This is your fault. I raised an eyebrow. Is it? Her nostrils flared. You turned him against me. I shook my head. You did that all on your own. She stared at me for a long moment, her whole body trembling. Then, without another word, she stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. Jason let out a slow breath, then collapsed back onto the couch, rubbing his face. Well, he muttered, that was fun. I smirked. Told you she'd come. He let out a weak chuckle. Yeah, you were right. Silence settled between us, but this time it wasn't as heavy. Jason exhaled. I think I'm done with her. I studied his face. You sure? He nodded. Yeah. His eyes met mine. I don't need her anymore. A small smirk tugged at my lips. Good. For the first time, Jason actually looked lighter. Like he had finally figured out who he really was. The next few days were quiet. Jason stayed at my place, barely touching his phone, barely speaking about Emily. I didn't push him. He needed time and I wasn't going to force him to process things on my timeline. But I knew the silence wouldn't last forever. On the fourth day, I walked into the living room to find Jason staring at his phone again. His jaw was clenched, his thumb hovering over the screen. She sent me a long text, he muttered. I sat down across from him. What's it say? He let out a short, humorless laugh. That she made a mistake. That she still loves me. That she doesn't know who she is without me. He shook his head. It's all about her, not me. I wasn't surprised. She wants control back. Jason nodded, his eyes still locked on the message. She's acting like I died or something. He tossed his phone onto the table and leaned back. She just doesn't get it. She never will. Jason rubbed his face, sighing. I don't even know what I feel anymore. I thought I'd be angrier. I thought I'd hate her. He exhaled. But I don't. I just don't care anymore. That was real. That was when I knew he had truly let go. I leaned back in my chair, watching him carefully. You want to respond? Jason stared at his phone for a long moment. Then, finally, he shook his head. No. And just like that, he was done. A few days later, Michael called. Jason answered and they spoke for over an hour. I gave them space, letting them figure out their own version of the truth. When Jason hung up, he looked exhausted but relieved. He's filing for divorce, he said simply. I nodded. Good. Jason exhaled. He's not mad at me. He said he still sees me as his son. His voice was quiet. That means a lot. I watched him closely. And how do you feel about it? A small, genuine smile crossed his face. I think I want both of you in my life. Something warm settled in my chest. Then that's what you'll have. Jason let out a breath, then grinned. You know, this is not how I thought my life was gonna go. I chuckled. Yeah, welcome to reality. Jason laughed, shaking his head. You know the crazy part? I raised an eyebrow. If she had just told the truth from the start, none of this would have happened. I smirked. Yeah. But then we wouldn't be here, would we? Jason considered that for a moment, then nodded. Guess not. And just like that, the past was behind us. The weeks that followed felt surreal. Jason settled into life with me like he had always been here, and honestly, it felt natural. No forced bonding, no awkward father-son moments. Just life. He still talked to Michael, and I didn't mind. The guy raised him after all. But Emily? She was completely out of the picture. She tried. She sent more texts, left voicemails, even showed up at my door once. But Jason didn't open it. He didn't even flinch when he saw her car parked outside one day. He had truly moved on, and watching him take control of his life like that, it was something I respected. Michael and I spoke a few times, though never for long. There was no animosity between us, no awkward rivalry. Just two men dealing with the damage Emily left behind. He told me he was finalizing the divorce and moving out of the house. Too many memories, he had said. I got it. One night, Jason and I sat out on the porch, watching the sky fade from deep blue to black. He stretched his legs out, resting his arms on the chair, looking more at peace than I had ever seen him. You ever wonder what would have happened if we met sooner? He asked. I thought about it for a second. Maybe. But wondering doesn't change anything. He smirked. Yeah. Guess not. A comfortable silence settled between us before Jason let out a breath and finally said the words I didn't know I needed to hear. I'm glad I found you. I glanced at him, seeing nothing but honesty in his face. Me too, kid. For the first time in a long time, everything felt exactly as it should be. No lies, no betrayals, no ghosts from the past. Just the truth. And that was enough.